All right, welcome everyone to this meeting of SABR's East Coast Cooperative, a group of several chapters in Eastern Canada and the United States who are working together to bring you more great presentations. I'm Bruce McClure, the chair of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter in Maine and New Hampshire, and tonight we have another great presentation for you. But first, I'd like to introduce the vice president of the Goose Goslin chapter in Southern New Jersey, Chris Butts. Chris, welcome to Northern New England. How in the world are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, and it's really great to be a part of this and to see you all. Thank you so much.
Man, it is all yours. Go get them.
Well, tonight, a few years ago, I read a great book on Dick Allen, and it was written by an author, Mitch Nathanson. The name of the book was God Almighty Hisself, The Life and Legacy of Dick Allen. We here in South Jersey, we're very familiar with Dick Allen. We're right outside of Philadelphia. He had a very complicated relationship with Phillies fans and the city of Philadelphia in general. A little blurb from the book: carrying to the plate baseball's heaviest and loudest bat, as well as the burden of being the club's first African-American superstar, Allen found both hits and controversy with ease and regularity as he established himself as the premier individualist in a game that prided itself on conformity. It took many years for Dick Allen to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and this year the Veterans Committee finally selected him in December, and he will be inducted next week. And I thought it'd be a timely way to have Mitch come along and discuss the impact he had on baseball and on the city of Philadelphia. Mitch Nathanson is a professor in the Jeffrey S. Murad Center for the Study of Sports Law at Villanova University outside of Philadelphia here. He's also the author of Boughton, The Life of a Baseball Original, Jim Boughton. And he's currently working on a fascinating sounding book about sports writers. It's called Bobo Newsom Memorial Society. So I'm looking forward to that one. Going to have a bit of a different format tonight. Mitch is going to talk about the book a little bit, and he's going to talk about Dick Allen, but we'd like to open up the room after that and just have any questions or that you may have about Dick Allen, just to learn about him more, and any questions that you may have thought of or ever had about him that we can discuss. So Mitch, I'm going to let you speak for a little bit, if that's okay.
Great. Well, thanks. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about Allen, how I got interested in it, and a little bit about his background and things like that. But yeah, to the extent that anybody wants to talk about anything in particular, or me focus on anything, just, chime in, because I think that's going to be more fun if everybody, just speaks up and says what they want to hear or what they want to talk about or anything like that. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about how I got interested in the book, which was because I wrote another book before this about it was really about the 77 Phillies and they had that collapse in the NLCS, but that was really just the kind of just the structure for the book that I wanted to write, which was a book about the relationship between the city of Philadelphia and its baseball teams, the A's and the Phillies, and why it was that people didn't really seem to like the Phillies ever, and they were really a non-entity until the A's left. And then they weren't a non-entity, but people really didn't like them. And it's kind of hard to think about that today when they have huge crowds and everything. But for most of their history, they didn't really get a lot of love from the city. And so I kind of went through all that. I wrote a little bit about Dick Allen. I think I must have written a page on Allen in that book. And I got more feedback on that page on Dick Allen than I got for the rest of the book all put together, which was a little bit depressing. But anyway, people contacted me, and they said one of two things. They said, I don't know why you would even waste any space on that guy. He was a cancer on the franchise and everything. He was horrible. And then other people would contact me and say, you don't understand this at all. He was completely misunderstood. He was a good guy, and he had a hell of a time here. And it really was like split down the middle. I mean, people say, this player's controversial. That usually means he's not liked. But Allen was really controversial in that there was a split. There has always been a split down the middle when it comes to Allen, and I just thought that was interesting. And I didn't remember Allen when he was here in the 60s, but I do remember Allen when he came back in the 70s, and I do remember I remember them wooing him in '75 when Dave Cash and Richie Ashburn and Mike Schmidt went to Percy to try to get him to come to Philadelphia because he left the White Sox towards the end of the '74 season, kind of walked out on them, and was traded to Atlanta, refused to report to Atlanta, and then the Phillies tried to get him from Atlanta, and he didn't want to come back to Philadelphia. And I remember all of that, and I remember the hullabaloo about trying to get him to come back here. And then when he finally did come back here, there was nothing but love for him. Even though he had another difficult stint here when he was here for '75 and '76, it didn't really go very well for him. But anyway, that's all I knew about Allen. And so I just thought it'd be interesting to really, just for myself more than anybody else, just try to kind of figure out what's going on with Allen. And so that's where the book comes from. And so what I learned about Allen was that and I was funny because I was talking to somebody else just the other day about this, about Allen, and now that I'm writing this book on sports writers, I spoke to a lot of sports writers in writing that book. And Allen, this actually becomes relevant because Allen did not talk to me for the book. Um, Everybody else did. Family members did. Um, Teammates did. Sports writers did. Allen did not talk to me for that book. Um, Ironically, once the book came out, Allen called me and started and like and he was very nice, but I was kind of like, well, I don't know what you want me to do with this information you're giving me because the book's out. I mean, that's it, it's over. But he was very nice. But again, he just ignored me. I tried many times to reach out to him and through different types of individuals, and nothing worked. But everybody else was very willing to talk about him. And one of the things I learned about Allen, and I figured out about Allen, was that Allen was in many ways a cipher or an avatar for whatever you wanted him to be. However you saw the world, however you saw Philadelphia, that's how you saw Allen. And Allen never pushed back. He didn't seem to care. And so if you wanted to portray him this way as just the worst guy in the world, he was okay with it. He wouldn't push back. On the other hand, if you wanted to portray him as a victim, he was okay with that too. And I think this is what happened with Allen, he was very shy. He was a shy guy and an introvert, and those are two separate things. But he was both. And he wasn't comfortable in groups. He wasn't comfortable talking to people he didn't know, and he really didn't was not comfortable with sports writers. Although he did have some friends who were sports writers. Uh, but what happened, I think, with Allen was that people had their own agendas. A lot of stuff was percolating at that time in the '60s, early '60s, particularly in Philadelphia, but in that North Philadelphia neighborhood where Connie Mack Stadium was, which was a stadium that was, I believe, again, I wrote this book a while ago, and it's in the book, but I believe it for a long time was a German and Polish working class neighborhood. And then it was becoming more of a black area by the late '50s. And so what you would have was you also had literally people running out of the city to go live in the suburbs, and then and because they felt like they were kind of exiled out of the city, and there was a lot of hostility and resentment to that. And they'd only come back to the city to go to Phillies games, and they'd go back to the old neighborhood, and then the neighborhood was kind of falling apart, and there was a lot of hostility and racial animus that went into that. And Allen became the focal point for that. Um, Interestingly, one thing that I learned when I was writing the book, um, and I'm sure everybody here, the great thing about talking to you guys is that I know everybody knows like so much more than me. So I can assume that you know a lot more than just like a regular, non-SABR crowd. But everybody, I'm sure most people are aware that Allen was Rookie of the Year in 1964. He had a great rookie year. The Phillies almost won the pennant in '64. They blew it at the end, um, and um, and then they also, you probably know, he was booed a lot in Philadelphia. And so I've learned when I was doing my research for the book that, like, when did the booing start? The booing started before the team melted down in late September. Um, the booing of Allen started. Um, there was no there was booing of Allen on two different occasions in '64. And remember, in '64, for most of the season, the Phillies were in first place. And as well, Allen is tearing up the league as the best rookie. And for the most part, people embraced him, except for two things. The first thing that happened in '64 had to do with the All-Star game, which is relevant since we just had an All-Star game. Somebody asked him, a reporter asked him if he was excited about the possibility of being named to the All-Star team. And his response was he didn't care. He said, "I don't care. There's no money in it. Willie Mays told me you're better off making the playoffs because you get $500 for that." And so that was a Sports Illustrated writer who asked him that question, and it showed up in Sports Illustrated the next week. And then, of course, that was played like Allen was ungrateful, didn't care. He was, not gracious, and he was booed a few times after that. That was the first time, but that kind of dissipated. The second time he was booed, and at this point, the booing didn't stop, and it didn't stop really until he left Philadelphia at the end of the '69 season. The second time he was booed was in early August of '64. Again, the collapse is in mid-September. So their Phillies are in first place, but the Phillies went on the road, and there was an altercation with the police around the Connie Mack Stadium area. It was a racially charged situation. The cops sort of cordoned off the area, and it became very much a racial thing. The Phillies were out of town when that happened, in first place, and Allen was clearly going to be Rookie of the Year. They came back from being out of town, still in first place. Allen's still, best, young player in the National League. And before Allen took the field for the first game back, he was booed by the vast majority of the people at Connie Mack Stadium. So why was he booed? He didn't say anything. He didn't have any comments about the situation. He was booed because I think he was a black man, and was a symbol of what kind of took place before, also playing into the previous All-Star game stuff. So you see that when I say he is a cipher, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, and he didn't really push back on any of that. He didn't have one comment about the riot in, well, it was called a riot. It wasn't really a riot. It was something else. But he didn't really push back, and he was fine with whatever people wanted to say about him. So after that, the Phillies fell apart. He was the only guy who hit, by the way, in the end of '64 when the rest of the team was collapsing. His numbers during that 10-game slide, I think he hit over 400 for those 10 games. He was the only guy who was hitting. The rest of the team couldn't hit. The pitching fell apart, but Allen was still hitting, and yet he was getting booed every night when he was around. And then that just kind of snowballed. We had 65 and 66. Team is not as good. Yeah, and that's the situation. And so I found Allen to be just a fascinating character in that he never really seemed to want to take charge of his own image. He just didn't seem. It just wasn't a thing that mattered to him. And I think to a lot of people's frustration, and the writers. Again, I spoke to pretty much every writer who covered him who was still around when I was writing the book, researching the book. I spoke to Stan Hockman a lot, and Larry Merchant and Bill Conlon and all these other guys who had covered Allen, even the people in the suburban papers as well. And they all said that they spent most of their days trying to figure out what was going on in his head, because he just wouldn't let you in. And if you're a writer, it's pretty frustrating. And I do have one example in the book of just how frustrating he could be to a writer. I just picked a day. I can't remember what year it was, 65, 66. I don't remember the year. I just picked a day, and I think I had the Inquirer, the Bulletin, the Daily News. I may have had a couple of other papers. And I just took the stories, the game stories that had the quotes, not the, yeah, they had the quotes and mostly the player, the most of the articles quoted Allen because he was the one who you would want to hear from, even though he didn't say all that much. Um, there was one quote that I wanted to see how it was reported in different papers. He gave a different explanation, that a contradictory explanation to like something that happened in a game. I can't remember, as a play or something. He gave a contradictory explanation 6 or 7 times over. And so when you read the explanation, Dick Allen's explanation of this play, if you read it in Hockman's column, it was different than in Conlin's column. And it was different than what was going on in the Inquirer. And it was different than what was going on in the Bulletin. It was different. And it wasn't just different words. It was completely contradictory. And so if you're a sports writer and you read that the next morning, you read like you got played. And so, yeah, you can see why this guy would piss people off. But he just didn't view that as his job. He viewed his job as playing ball, and that was it. Although he wanted to be paid for it, which was a whole other thing, which we can talk about. But I think I talked longer than I thought I was going to talk. But if anybody has anything they want to talk about or questions or anything, we can do that, or I can just ramble on.
The way we usually work this is, excuse me, if you have a question for our presenter, Mitch Nathanson, tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the reactions button. You'll see another button marked raise hand. Raise your hand and we'll get you in line to ask some questions. And we know how this goes. We got some already. Craig Gerritsen, you were first up, my dude. How are you, Craig?
I'm doing good.
Go get him, brother.
It was a great presentation. Everybody knows about John Olerud, but I'm wondering if Dick Allen was really the first guy to wear a helmet as a fielder.
I don't know if he was the first guy to wear a helmet as a fielder, but I know why he wore the helmet. He didn't. In fact, that came up. I just saw that came up. I read that something recently. Somebody was talking about helmet in the field. But anyway, the story was that he wore the helmet in the field because people were throwing things at him. That's not the case. They may have thrown things at him, but he wore his helmet in the field he wanted to wear his helmet. I think he wore it in Little Rock. He wanted to wear it. I think he wanted to wear it somewhere he played in the minors, and I think Lucchese was his manager one year in AA and wouldn't let him. But he said that he liked to wear his helmet in the field because he thought that it was just easier that way. He'd have to change things. It was a sartorial decision. It was, yes, later on, he did have it in the field and people did throw things at him. But that's not why he wore the helmet. He wore the helmet because he liked to wear the helmet.
Thanks.
And here's Dick wearing the helmet in 74, actually. That picture was taken with the White Sox. Hopefully you guys can see that. Next up. Oh, look who's next up. Holy cow. Yes, I saw that look. The president of the Elysian Fields chapter in Northern New Jersey is up next. Donna Muscarella. Donna, how you doing tonight? Don, I think you're muted. Something's wrong. We are experiencing technical difficulties with Donna.
How about now?
There she is. There you go.
I know what happened. Okay. So there's apparently, I learned this in another meeting, and I guess I just did it now without realizing. My headset has a separate mute button from the Zoom mute. So I unmuted myself in Zoom and thought I was good, but I wasn't. So sorry about that. So before I ask my question of Mitch, I just want to formally welcome Chris and the Goose Goslin chapter into the co-op. It's great to have our neighbors to the south as part of this very lively group. So welcome, Chris and the geese. So Mitch, I was just wondering, did you make a conscious effort to watch the Hall of Fame announcement? If you did, how did you react? Not in terms of expectations, but emotionally. And are you going to induction?
um, I didn't watch it. I mean, I think one one thing that I think helped me when I was working on the book was that I didn't have an agenda for this book. I'm not a Dick Allen guy. I don't dislike Dick Allen. I don't. I'm as in the middle as you can get. I'm neutral to Allen. I didn't grow up with him. You know, I understand the situation and I feel for him, and I did develop that because then as I learned more about what his situation was, I do think that Allen, in his own way, was a civil rights pioneer in baseball, much the way Curt Flood was, um, very differently than Curt Flood. And, you know, Jackie Robinson. Every time you bring in Jackie Robinson, that's like a class of its own. But also in a very different way, which I'll talk about in a second. But in terms of him getting in the Hall of Fame, I always think it's better. You're better to be the best guy not in the Hall of Fame, right? Because then every year they talk about you, and you get some publicity. Harold Baines, he got nothing but bad press when he got in, and now nobody talks about him anymore. So no, in fact, I had written another book that came out last year about minor leaguers, black minor leaguers who didn't make the majors. And I was actually speaking to one of the people that is in that book. I spoke to him over the weekend, Mickey Bowers, who was in the Phillies system in the late 60s, early 70s. And so he asked me if I was going, and I said I wasn't. And I asked if he was going, and he said no. He said he was asked by somebody else to go, but he didn't want to go because he thought it'd just be a madhouse. If Alan was going to be there and talk, I would think that would be fascinating. I would love to hear what Alan was going to say. Um, I think, I think, I don't know who's going to say what. I'm very disappointed that we can't hear Parker talk and we can't hear Alan talk, because I think those are two people who have a lot of interesting things to say, and I would really like to hear what they have to say. And unfortunately, this process dragged out so long that we're not going to hear either of them, which is a crime. But no, I'm not. I'm not. I would go, except that I don't know. I think it's going to be crazy out there. There's, don't forget, there's all the Ichiro fans.
Oh,
So there's
I'm
going
well
to.
aware. I'm going.
Oh, so you're going to be overwhelmed with Ichiro fans and a lot of Philadelphia people. I know tons of Philly people who are going, which is great. The thing that I wanted to say about Allen, and why the civil rights aspect to this, because he was never a crusader for anyone other than himself. And that is 100% clear. And so that's not Curt Flood. That's not Jackie Robinson, right? But I think you can make a really good case for him, because I couldn't figure out the conundrum of Dick Allen, like, because there have historically been two different takes on Allen. One is that he wanted special treatment, right? And that was bad. The other was, no, he was a great teammate. He just wanted to fit in, right? Those are the two things. Both are wrong. And both are right at the same time, in that I think that baseball, what I figured out, I think, and this is my theory, I could be wrong, but baseball had two double standards, and Allen wanted to be the beneficiary of one of those double standards, and he ended up becoming the victim of the second one. So the two double standards were, in baseball, as in most sports, superstars get treated differently. That's just how it works, right? There's the Jordan rules. It's true today. It's always been true. It was true back in the 60s and the 50s and the 30s and the 20s with Babe Ruth. Superstars get treated differently. Allen did not want to be treated like everybody else. He wanted to be treated like a superstar because he was the superstar. There was no question he was the superstar. He wanted the Mickey Mantle treatment, right? Unfortunately, the other double standard was black players don't get treated as well as white players. And he was treated, not only was he not treated like a superstar, he was treated worse than other players. And so that made him crazy for good reason, right? And so the reason why I think, why you can make a case for him is that I think what he was really fighting for, again, he's only fighting for himself, really. But what he's fighting for is the right to be treated the way other players were treated, other players like him were treated. He was not a normal, everyday player. He was a superstar. And he wanted to be treated that way. And he demanded it. That's how he ended up being the highest paid player in baseball pre-free agency with the White Sox. He was the highest paid player for 3 years. He only got that because, quite frankly, he made a pain in the ass of himself. But that's the only way that was going to happen. So anyway, that's my little spiel.
We've got a lot of questions, a lot of hands up. One in the chat from Jack Morris, who is having technical issues tonight. At the SABR convention in Dallas, Fergie Jenkins said that playing in Little Rock didn't bother him, but it really bothered Dick Allen. How did his time in Little Rock shape his career in the future?
Yeah, so Little Rock again is so complicated. And yeah, Jenkins and Allen were, I think, the only two black players there. And then Jenkins got shipped out pretty quickly, I believe. And Allen was by himself. Little Rock was weird because I know that everybody, I think Orville Faubus was still the governor there, right? I believe he still was.
You're right.
And so, everybody knows Orville Faubus from 1958 or 57 with the Little Rock High School, and him standing at the steps, but the Arkansas Travelers had disbanded by 1960 because I think the Southern League disbanded because they wouldn't integrate. And so the major league teams just couldn't put affiliates down there. And so after what happened, I think it was 57, the Little Rock thing, the downtown of Little Rock just fell apart. Businesses left, people left. It had such a horrible reputation. And so part of the reason that Allen was even in Little Rock in 63 was because the Travelers had been reconstituted specifically to be an integrated team. A lot of people don't realize that. They think these are the Travelers of old. They were not. They were specifically created to be integrated. And they were supposed to be an example of the new Little Rock. And this whole thing was being led by Faubus, by the way. Faubus was a part owner of that team, and he was the owner of that team to make it integrated. And so Allen and Jenkins find themselves on that team, and in order to put a team there, they desegregated downtown Little Rock. So the hotels and the restaurants were desegregated. The problem was when teams came into Little Rock, yes, black and white players could stay in the same hotel. But if you played in Little Rock, that was still segregated. And so what happened was Allen couldn't live where other people lived. He had to live in the black section of town. He lived with a family. I can't remember who he lived with. Somebody famous, by the way, as it turned out. But anyway, he's living in a place which is parading itself around as being this new South, but he's living in really the old South because he's living there. And the Phillies didn't do anything to really help him. They didn't send anybody there with him. They could have sent some other people there with him to help him out, find him a place to live, but they didn't do any of that. And again, Allen is a young kid, is not coming from a segregated background. He's coming from Western Pennsylvania, which his little town was. People in Wampum. Is anybody here from Wampum? Before I insult Wampum, people in Wampum love to talk about how progressive they were, but they weren't so progressive. It was not the South, but it was. There was kind of a relationship between blacks and whites where everybody kind of understood what the score was, and so Allen never really had any overt racism directed at him until he got to Little Rock, and it was a shock because he didn't experience that any of his life, and it was very tough. And he quit at one point, and his mother talked him out of it. And mother made him go back.
I believe it was Charlie and Hattie Hughes that he lived with in Arkansas.
Yeah, there was somebody who lived in that house who became a singer. As I recall, it's in the book, but I can't remember who it was. But
let's keep plowing through here. Next up is somebody who had a really good mail day today. He got something nice in the mail from me. Glenn Vassy, you're up. What's going on, Glenn?
Thank you very much, Bruce. Yes,
you're very welcome.
Well, it's nice to see South Jersey represented. I grew up from the age of 4 to 12 in South Jersey, in what was then Levittown and has now gone back to being Willingboro. And I became a baseball fan during that period of time, like most of us that became fans. And my dad took me to my first game at Connie Mack Stadium when I was about 8 years old, 10 years old, thereabouts. And Dick Allen was there, hit a ball completely out of the stadium. I mean, just it went into the parking lot. And huge reaction from the fans. They loved it. And I got my first lesson in urban economics. As we left the game, my dad and I were walking along, and kid came running up and said, "I got the ball Dick Allen hit, $5. And I said, "Dad, that's the ball Dick Allen hit." He said, "Wait a minute." And we walked another 50 feet, 100 feet, and some other kid with another ball comes running up and says, "I got the ball Dick Allen hit, $5. 5 times we were offered the ball that Dick Allen hit out of that ballpark. So at any rate, one of my earliest baseball memories, and it was a lesson in urban economics brought to us by Dick Allen. But yeah, I don't think I've ever been in a stadium where I saw anybody else hit a ball completely out of the stadium. It was pretty impressive. He was an amazing player, and I liked him. I know that there were a lot of people in Philly who didn't, but I certainly liked him as a kid growing up. And I thought he was ill-treated. That's what I have to say.
Let's go to John Graff. John, you are up. How are you? Haven't seen you in ages.
I'm well. I appreciate the invite to be part of this. And Mitch, good to meet you online here. My original question was going to be about Little Rock and the civil rights connection, so I appreciate your remarks on that. I'm wondering then, resorting to Plan B, what you're able to tell us about about Dick Allen's infamous altercation with Frank Thomas.
yeah, so that one. Now, when that happened, all of the sports writers were in Gene Mauch's office. And so Gene Mauch had called them all in for some other reason. And so there were no sports writers who were witnesses. There were some fans who were in the stands who saw it. But and then there were players who were there, obviously, but they weren't talking. And so basically what it came down to is, and again, on top of this, Allen never said anything. And getting back to Larry Merchant, right? So Merchant was the one, everybody familiar with Larry Merchant? He was a boxing analyst for many years on HBO. But before that, Pimp My my sports writers book. He created, probably, in my opinion, the greatest sports section in the history of sports sections, which was the Philadelphia Daily News sports section of the early to late 60s. There were so many great writers in that sports section, but Merchant was the guy who really went after Allen because of the Frank Thomas thing, and Merchant didn't see it. Merchant was in was in Gene Mauch's office along with Stan Hochman and everybody else who was covering the Phillies on the beat. So the best we know is that Thomas, who was known to be a needler, picked he was picking on another player. He was picking on an outfielder, a black outfielder, younger than somebody here knows who this is. I'm just drawing a blank on him. Was picking on this guy. I can't remember who it was.
Johnny Briggs, maybe?
I think it was West Covington.
No, it was not Covington. Covington
No?
would have hit him. I think it may have been Johnny Briggs. I'm not positive, but he was, and Covington was a veteran, so it wouldn't have been Covington. It was a young guy. I think it might have been Briggs, but irrespective. Thomas was picking on this guy. In fact, when they got into LA, I think I remember this. It's amazing I remember this. I wrote this so long ago, but it's coming back to me like a dream. He in LA, they would stay in this hotel that had bungalows. And Thomas went to this guy, I think it was Briggs. It's in the book. I don't remember specifically. And he said to the guy, "Hey boy, take my bags." That's what he said. And Allen heard this. And Allen, I think, pushed him and said, "Don't you? If you don't you ever say that? If you ever said to me, something like I'll put you through a wall." And so from that point on, Allen and it wasn't so much Allen, but Thomas got offended because he thought he was just fooling around. Anyway, so they were doing batting practice, and somebody was bunting. I think it may have even been Callison who was bunting, or it was somebody else who was bunting who had not laid down a good bunt the night before, costing the game. And Thomas was needling them. And somebody yelled something at Thomas, and Thomas thought it was Allen who said it. Allen hadn't said anything. Again, another example. Allen didn't say anything, but Thomas thought Allen had said something. And so Thomas hit him with a bat. And then Allen hit him. But Thomas hit him with a bat first. Something like he thought that Allen had said something, and then Thomas's response was, "What are you, another Muhammad Clay?" Something like that. That's how it was relayed to me by Bill Conlon. But whatever he said, then he hit him. And then there was this whole altercation. What happened in the aftermath of that was that, and this is the thing that Larry Merchant didn't know, which was the Phillies told the whoever the GM was at the time, what's his name?
John Quinn.
John Quinn. John Quinn told the players, nobody should talk. No, anybody who says anything about this gets fined. Allen, if you say anything, your fine is double. So nobody said anything. And so when Larry Merchant and the others tried to ask what happened, nobody would say anything. And then the rumor started to spread that Allen tried to get Thomas released, but he didn't. In fact, Merchant was wrong when he wrote that Allen had tried to get Thomas released. In fact, Allen went to Quinn and said, "Please do not release him, because if you release him, I'm going to get blamed for this. And I don't want to get blamed for this. Let's just play it out. Don't do anything." But Quinn released him. It wasn't Quinn, Carpenter released him, actually. Carpenter, I think, overruled Quinn and released him. And so when people came back to Allen and say, "Did you have anything to do with this?" Allen wouldn't say anything. And so there you go. There's a narrative. A narrative is the spoiled young player, black, cost this guy his job. And Allen didn't refute it, didn't say anything. And Merchant just went after him. If you look at those columns that he wrote in the aftermath of that, he was brutal. And so there you go. There's the narrative. Again, Allen really was on the periphery of that whole thing. But again, Thomas thought he had said something. He had not said anything. He hit him with a bat. And again, in the All-Star, not the All-Star game, but later that season, Roseboro hit Marichal with a bat. Right? And Roseboro got suspended. Here, Thomas hit Allen with a bat. Nobody disputed that. And Allen was the one catching crap. Right? And so that turned into a whole big thing. At the end of the day, all it did was hardened Allen's opinion that he couldn't trust the media. And it just got more and more contentious as the years went on.
Thank you.
Let me try that again. Next up, John Alcamo. Go get him.
Am I on? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, he seemed to be playing with a chip on his shoulder all of the time. From the gist of it that I'm getting out of that, I remember seeing a photo of him playing first base, and he wrote "boo" on the infield dirt. And I mean, Philadelphia is a hard place to play. I mean, many of us have seen the Mike Schmidt thing on MLB Network, and how Schmitty had a hard time in Philadelphia playing. Also, was he really happy? I mean, was it kind of like a release for him when he got let go from Philadelphia and went on to? He went 1 year to St. Louis, and then he went to the Dodgers for a year, and then I think he won the MVP in '72 with the Chicago White Sox. How was he received as the fan base with the Chicago White Sox?
Well, so first of all, in terms of playing in Philadelphia, so I know that there was, so he played a lot of different positions. He was not a great defender, but they moved him around. He was an outfielder. He was drafted. He was signed before the draft. He was signed as a shortstop. And then they moved him to the outfield. He played some second base. They moved him to third, by the way, in spring training of '64. He had never played third base before, and he made, I think, 42 errors or something like that. But so he played all over, and then he played first at the end with the Phillies. And I know then he went around, he played, he would sometimes play the outfield, sometimes he played first, sometimes he played third. And so I remember this is getting to your point. And so a writer somewhere, I don't know if it was Los Angeles or St. Louis, asked him, do you have any preference on where you want to play? And he said, I'll play anywhere. I'll play first base. I'll play third base. I'll play second base. I'll play outfield. The only place I won't play is Philadelphia. And so that's how he felt about Philadelphia at the end. Now, when he went to St. Louis, he didn't report on time in St. Louis. I know there was a holdout there in spring training, and the same when he went to Los Angeles in '71. I had to say, and I spoke to Ross Newhan, who covered the Dodgers. His son David Newhan played in big majors for a while, and so he was covering the Dodgers back then. And he had a very interesting point about Allen in spring training with the Dodgers, and he caught a lot of crap in spring training with the Dodgers because he was never there. And what Newhan said was that because even I wrote stories like that, and then one day I got to the complex early. And who's there but Allen? And he's taking swings off of a college pitcher who he paid to go with him. And I learned that he was taking his swings and doing all his work early in the morning before anybody else got there, and then he'd leave. He was gone by the time everybody else showed up. And his explanation was spring training was a lot of standing around. It was a lot of standing around, a lot of nothing. He said, I don't know why I have to stand around. I can get all my work in the morning and I'm done. And so he just thought it was a waste of time. I think he's right. Now maybe you stick around because you're on the team, but he wasn't wrong about that. And when he went to Chicago, the White Sox did everything they could to help ingratiate themselves with him. I know that they made sure that when they wrote on his contract, it was a contract with Dick Allen and not Richie Allen. That was the first. That was the first thing they did, and he still held out spring training for them too. And really, I think the reason he held out so much in spring training all the time was because he didn't like spring training. And so, the longer you hold out, the less spring training you have to go to. And so he signed late, but I think the fans loved him in Chicago until the end of '74 when he had gotten hurt and he was leading the league in home runs, and he kind of walked out on him with a couple weeks left to go in the season. He still was the home run champ, but I think that they had it with him. I know that he kind of turned on Chuck Tanner, who was like his big. Chuck Tanner's also from Western Pennsylvania, from Newcastle County, and Chuck Tanner was a huge supporter of his, and Allen sort of turned on him at the end, and by the end, I think they were ready for a separation.
That was you just answered my next question I was going to ask you about, was his relationship with Chuck Tanner also. Did he ever have any interaction with Jackie Robinson that you may know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm aware of. I will say, though, I don't know anything about Robinson, but I do know Flood. And I do know that, Flood, again, is a guy who did a lot of commendable things. But he also has a little bit of revisionist history there, in that he later on he talked about the reason he wasn't going to Philadelphia. Now, he was, of course, that was the trade. The trade was Dick Allen to St. Louis for Curt Flood, and then a few other players, Tim McCarver and other players. The reason Curt Flood didn't report to Philadelphia initially was not because he was making a bigger point, was because he said, I don't want to be the next Dick Allen. I don't want to be treated like that. And I'm not going to Philadelphia. I think had Flood, I know he didn't want to be traded. Had he been traded to the Dodgers, he would have gone to the Dodgers. But he just didn't want to go to Philadelphia. And so again, if you want to think about, well, what did Curt Flood do for baseball? I don't think Curt Flood would have done a single thing for baseball had he not been traded to Philadelphia, and had he not followed Dick Allen into Philadelphia. I think that was a huge impetus for everything that happened with Flood afterwards.
All right, next up is Mark Hoyle. I made him wait too long. I've got a hat for him and everything, and go. You're on mute.
I said, I'll probably see you Friday too. And thank you. This kind of piggybacks off of what John just brought up. It's kind of a question and then a comment and a question. As a kid, looking at the back of baseball cards, I look at the back of Dick Allen's card and Bobby Bonds' card and think, why did these guys get traded so much? And they were such good players. So I guess my question is, who had the best 4-year run with 4 different teams consecutive? I didn't look it up. So my feeling is it's probably pretty close, both of those guys.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, Allen, you look at Allen, the thing with Allen in the Hall of Fame, I don't know about 4 years, but I know if you look at him from 64 through 74, right? That 11-year span, there's not too many players that had a better 11-year span than he did. Allen's problems were that he didn't have an on-ramp and an off-ramp. He started off hot and he fell off the table, right? So usually a ball player will have 3 or 4 years ramping up, and then 3 or 4 or 5 years at the end, and that's where you build up those numbers. All of Allen's numbers come in those 11 years. And so, yeah, he doesn't have the numbers that other players have, but he doesn't have the longevity of a Willie Mays or a Hank Aaron or Ernie Banks or, any of those guys. So, I mean, I would say that is, somebody asked me earlier about the Hall of Fame. I do think that when you put together a stretch like that for a decade, I don't know why you need those 5 years on each side, which are mediocre, to make your case. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Stephen Meyerson, you're up.
Thank you, Bruce. About the Hall of Fame, I looked up his WAR was about 60, which is the borderline for getting in. I suppose his lack of defensive value played a part there. And I noticed his splits were much higher versus lefties rather than against righties. Was there something in the stadiums he played or the swings where he did much better against left-hand pitching?
Well, I guess he's a right-handed hitter, so he's going to hit better against lefties. But no, I don't know. I mean, he used to tease every year that he was going to switch hit. He could hit left-handed. He never did it, but he always used to tease that he was going to. When he hurt his in '67 when he severed his ulnar nerve, which people thought he got cut in a bar fight again, which he did not. He actually did get hurt the way he said, which was pushing his car off of a curb. As a matter of fact, if you go into the Bulletin's archives, you can see photographs of the car with the blood on it. I mean, the Bulletin sent a camera guy to Germantown that night while Allen was in the emergency room. I think he was at Temple, and they sent a photographer to Germantown who took photographs of the car. So you can see that's what happened. But anyway, after that happened, he had a lot of trouble with his wrist, and he was thinking of switch hitting, but he just never did after that. But he could hit righties and lefties. But I guess, most right-handers, I guess, just hit lefties better.
Back to Glenn Vassy.
Yes, I just wanted to throw out one comment about how difficult Philly fans are. I attended a game not too many years ago, and the first batter for the Phillies in that game was Rollins. And he came up to bat, and before the pitcher could even get onto the mound, this guy behind me is shouting, "Go ahead and swing now, swing now. You always swing at the first pitch. Go ahead and swing now. You might as well not wait for the pitcher to throw it." And the pitcher throws the ball, and it's a perfect strike, and Rollins let it go by. The same guy behind me shouts, "What are you letting that one go for?" So, yeah, Philly fan is traditionally very, very difficult. And if they have anything that they can leverage, they'll leverage it. Just wanted to add that.
They're tough out there. Mike Lalagos in the chat, you said he ended up calling you after the book came out. With him being an introvert, as well as him being someone who wouldn't give the media much, did you learn anything from speaking with him that you didn't know already, or had any opinion altered?
Not really. It's just the typical Dick Allen moment where it's like you're scratching your head like, why is this happening? I don't understand why this is happening now as opposed to before. Not really. He was a very, very friendly, very soft-spoken guy. I heard from his son, who was a very nice guy, who I also spoke to. Actually, I spoke to him for the book, but he said that when his father got the book when it came out, and then he would call up everybody. He said to, I can't remember the context of how he said it, but there was a group of people in the room, and Allen's said to them, "Who talked?" And everybody kind of raised their hand because everybody talked. And he didn't, I guess he just doesn't like people outside his circle getting to know him, getting too close. That is one thing that I did kind of learn, which I thought was kind of sad. That I did speak to a lot of people who called themselves friends of his, and I don't pass judgment. I didn't get the impression that they were really friends. Like it was Allen would just keep everybody at such a distance. And it was, I wondered whether Allen had any friends. He had a lot of people he had a lot of people who were friendly towards him, and he was friendly towards them. But there was always a fear. And I intuited this fear every time I talked to somebody who was friendly with him, that if they said the wrong thing, they would be cut off, and they were afraid of being cut off. And to me, it was like, well, you're not his friend, right? That's not a friend, right? If you say the wrong thing, you're cut off. That's a transactional relationship. And the transaction is, I don't know what Allen's getting out of that relationship, but this person is getting, I don't know what they're getting. Maybe they can say that they know Dick Allen. I don't know what it is. But to me, I came away with the impression that I don't know if this guy had too many friends. And I just think that was maybe a product of just so many times that he had been burned and things that hadn't turned out for him, people taking advantage of him. I am speculating as to all of that stuff, but one thing I did see and I did intuit was that this was not a guy with a lot of friends. In fact, I couldn't identify one.
Donna, I'm going to go to Chris Butts first, and then I'm going to take your question last. Okay, Chris Butts, you're up, man. What's your
Mitch,
question?
I do want to state on a happy note. When he came back to the Phillies, he wasn't as good as he was in the '60s. But I did read where he had some influence, a positive influence on some of the players, including Mike Schmidt. The famous day in 1976 when Mike Schmidt hit 4 home runs, he was really struggling, and Dick Allen said, "Go out there and have fun," and just lightened him up and cheered him up so much so that Mike Schmidt went out and hit 4 home runs in one day. Could you speak of the positive influence he had in those later years?
So yeah, he came back and I remember I have such a vivid memory in my head of watching some sort of news footage of Allen's return, and there was a footage of him in the locker room at the vet, and he's sitting in a rocking chair, and that was like the old man. He was, what was he, 33? I don't know. He wasn't that old, but yeah, he was a mentor to Schmidt. I think that he saw a lot of himself in Schmidt because here was the next young superstar who was getting booed all the time. And I do think that's right, that he saw himself a decade earlier. I did write a lot about what happened in the aftermath of '76, and in terms of I think I may have written more in the '77 Phillies book, but that broom closet incident when they clinched in Montreal, and then a bunch of the players, a bunch of the black players and Schmidt, Allen, Maddox, Cash, and Schmidt, I think, were in the broom closet and doing whatever people do in a broom closet after one wins the National League East. Apparently they were eating powdered donuts is all I would say when they came out. But anyway, but that kind of tore the team apart. And even before that, because he had gotten injured before, and then I think he got hit by John Candelaria, and he kind of missed the last few weeks of the season. And a lot of these racial rifts opened up, and people blame that on Allen. And to me, I didn't think that Allen caused any of those rifts. I think what happened was, I think that Allen was generally a positive influence. I think that what happened was that he exposed some rifts that were there that people weren't really wanting to acknowledge until he was there. And once he was there, Allen is just going to be Allen. And so he's going to do what Dick Allen does. And that's going to cause people, just like they did in the first time he was there, to start to take sides and look at race and things like that. And I think there were racial issues on that team. I think there were racial issues on the team before Allen got there that people kind of papered over with Yes We Can and Dave Cash and all that stuff. And I think a lot of that, there was some truth to that, but I also think a lot of that was sort of papered over issues that people just didn't want to acknowledge anymore. But I do think he was a positive influence.
Thank you.
All right, last one for tonight is Donna Muscarella. She's back up. Donna, go.
So I asked Bruce to hold this till the end because it is not a question about Dick Allen, but rather about your next project. When Chris sent me the promo copy, I had a thought. And then when I gave the promo copy to Craig Garrettson, who's the editor-in-chief for our chapter newsletter, he had the same question. Have you spoken yet to Jerry Eisenberg for your sports writers book?
I have not, although I do want to, but he's not part of... there's not too many people still around for that. I would like to talk to him. The group that I'm focusing on, he's not part of, but he certainly could add some color and information to that. So yeah, I know that's not one you want to wait around too long for.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have Chris put you in touch with me, and I can help you make that happen.
You can? Well, I
Yes.
really would appreciate that, because that would really be great. I was mentioning before that the one of the people that really is central to the book is Len Schechter, but he's been dead since '74, and there's really nothing on him. It's so hard to get anything. He doesn't have any papers. He doesn't have any kids. He's like missing, and so I don't know what the relationship between Jerry Eisenberg was and Schechter, but anything that could shed light on Schechter or this little group of writers that I'm focused on would be great. So yeah, I would love to talk to him.
Okay.
That'd be great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The
So
book.
Chris, you could connect us.
I sure will, Donna.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
All right. The book is God Almighty Hisself, The Life and Legacy of Dick Allen. Mitch, tell us where we can get that thing.
Well, I think you can get it on Amazon and
There you go.
I would say bookstores, but I don't know if they're still in bookstores. But yeah, Amazon is probably good, or wherever you buy books, probably online. It's from the University of Pennsylvania Press, and they every once in a while run a promo with like 40% off. So
nice.
sometimes they run a good deal, and so you can get a good deal from them. But I don't think it's that expensive right now on Amazon. I think that there's no more hardcovers, but I think there's more paperbacks. You know, if you, I can get you a signed paperback. It would probably cost you more than what you can get from Amazon, though. But if you're interested in that, you can just you know, message me or whatever. And
But it's signed by Mitch Nathanson. I mean, come on, that's worth it.
You know, that's like getting a cassette tape with Foghat on it. It's worth it's in the 99-cent bin, but if it was blank, it's $4, right? So you're better off getting the book that's not signed by me. It's got more value.
Donna in the chat, $23.32 on Amazon. There you go. All right. All right. Join the Clyde Sukeforth chapter tomorrow night at 7:00 Eastern, when we will have Phil Coffin and his book, A Baseball Book of Days, 31 Moments That Transformed the Game. The sign-up link is available in the chapter meeting booklet and at the SABR events calendar. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you're not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org today. Hey, Chris, we did all right, huh?
Thank you so much, Mitch. And thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Donna.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks
Before
again.
we go, Donna, when's your next meeting?
Oh, geez, you're putting me on the spot.
Right?
August 5th with Vanessa Ivy Rose.
Yes.
She's appeared with the Sukeforth chapter, and is an amazing human being who is doing a phenomenal job of keeping her grandfather's legacy alive. Her grandfather is Hall of Famer Norman Turkey Stearns from the Negro Leagues. And she and her family have a great tradition of the many different ways that they keep his legacy and his memory alive. And she is a really, really fun guest. She's I'm not going to call her an entertainer, but she is entertaining. She loves being in front of people, and she's very engaging. So that's August 5th. That's our next virtual.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. We appreciate you. Mitch, you're fantastic. Appreciate you doing this, man.
Well, thanks again. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. I said I haven't talked about Dick Allen in a long time. It's great to talk about him.
You did a hell of a job. We appreciate you. Hey, let's get everybody out of here. Hope we're going to see you tomorrow night. But if not, we'll see you down the road. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.